Better Buildings for Humans is powered by Advanced Glazings, makers of the Solera line of products. Solera is the leading glass glazing made specifically for architectural daylighting and with extreme insulation performance. Learn more at advancedglazings.com.
Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Better Buildings for Humans. I'm your host, Joe Menchefski. This is the show where we talk about the impact that the built environment has on our health, our wellness, our productivity, our ability to learn, the way we get educated, and our joy of being alive. And of course, we always talk about sustainability as well. This week, I have Craig Schiller from CHPS, or do we pronounce it CHIPS, Craig?
CHIPS, we do.
We're going to call it CHIPS. That's wonderful. Craig is the executive director, CEO of CHIPS, and this is going to be a really important conversation. We're going to talk about high performance schools today. Craig, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I've listened to your podcast and I love the conversations.
Well, thank you. Look, let's start. It's always better to start by having our listeners learn a little bit more about our guests. So tell us about you. Tell us about the journey that led to you becoming the executive director of CHIPS.
Yeah, those are kind of two different stories. I'll give the quick background about myself. I grew up in the country of Wisconsin and very outdoor oriented. I went to school for degrees in geology and geophysics and environmental studies. I thought I was going to be a park ranger. I thought that would be great to be in the national parks, educating folks on our natural environment. And halfway through college, I read the book Natural Capitalism by Amory Lovins, who was for a long time the CEO of Rocky Mountain Institute. And I got enamored. I flipped my career to go into sustainability. I was fascinated by the concept, the power it had. This was early before it was a real buzzword and before it became mainstream. And so, I went to grad school for sustainable design at Carnegie Mellon University and eventually was very fortunate to end up working at RMI for almost 8 years. Got to work with Amory for the new net zero headquarters that RMI created. Got to work on a bunch of projects in climate policy and decarbonization and higher education, and ended up in the aviation team working on decarbonizing aviation. So my background is I'm a generalist and consider myself kind of an advocate for doing more sustainable things, decarbonized things. When I was at Carnegie Mellon, my thesis was actually on schools that it can be used as teaching tools. So I was really fascinated by how the built environment can influence us, not just from our health and perspective, but how it can shape how we think and how we act. And at that time, I actually studied CHIPS's criteria, and we'll talk about that. But I learned and studied CHIPS and what high performance schools were as part of my thesis. Well, fast forward to COVID, got let go with the aviation team at RMI, and I needed to figure out what was next. So I was very fortunate to be able to buy a really small RV. I traveled the country for 6 months on a Who Am I journey. I had a little vision quest. I had a career coach. I had a therapist. I had a team of my friends and family who I would vet ideas around. And, when I was looking for jobs that align my passion, my skill set, my interest in the impact I want on the world, and was really fortunate the timing for the executive director position for CHIPS was at that same time I was looking, and applied, end up going through the interview process and getting the job.
That is a wonderful story. That is a really cool story. I can't even conceive of the decarbonization of aviation. Talk about a complex challenge. Holy cow.
I've had this trend in my career where every sector says they're the hardest sector. Buildings were net zero energies are hard. And then you go to higher education and they say they're the hardest sector. Then you work with airports and they say they're the hardest sector. Now I'm working with schools. I think they're the hardest sector.
Oh, really? Okay. That's
glutton
interesting.
for punishment. Yeah.
That's interesting. All right, let's dive right in and talk about CHIPS, which stands for, correct me if I'm wrong, the Collaborative for High Performance Schools.
Correct.
Okay. What are the factors? Let's go back to the beginning. What are the factors that drove the creation of this organization, and how did it come together?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that was in the early 2000s, over 20 years ago. We just had our 20th anniversary last year. The reason CHIPS existed was after LEED was created as the building standard of, one of the milestone movements of green buildings and sustainability. There was a recognition that school buildings have a unique audience, have a unique tenant, have a unique customer that they're accommodating for children and teachers, and that a standard needed to be specific for those unique needs. And so CHIPS was born out of this desire to have a third-party building standard specific to schools. Yeah. So that was the
That's
origin
what
story.
drove it.
That was the vision.
Has the sort of mandate changed over the last 20 years?
No, it hasn't. It's a school specific building standard. That is the bread and butter of what CHIPS has been for the last 20 years. What we consider, the criteria that we consider high performance schools has changed and evolved and grown, just like LEED has over the last 20 years, but our mission has been the same. With the exception, Joe, and I think we'll talk about this at the end, my plan for evolving CHIPS moving forward is to move away not just from this building certification program, but from other programs that we can help school districts with, right? Building standards are a part of the solution. They're not the entire solution. So we're trying to figure out what else we can do to help school districts.
Do you want to talk about that right now, or do we want to circle back to that? Because
Let's wait till the end.
all right, okay.
Let's keep on CHIPS.
Okay, very good. Let's talk about the key components of a high performance school.
Yeah.
Like, what defines a high performance school? What are the key aspects?
Yeah, there's so many definitions out there. There really are, and there's a lot of great ones. What my definition is really a building that incorporates any of the data-driven and design iterations over the last few decades. Right? Our schools need to represent the best of us, data, fact-driven design and solutions. So, I guess said differently, or the way that I frame it differently, is I like to work backwards. I like the high performance building to address and meet the needs of students and teachers. So if we talk about what the most essential items are from there, then we can go into the nuanced details of what those criteria and those attributes are. So for example, we know that students need to be productive in school, right? A school is designed to help them learn and grow and be productive in their studies. So what are the attributes of a building that help with productivity? Things like daylighting. The data and science shows how valuable that is to students' productivity and their attention span. Acoustics, oxygen levels, right? These are all proven to have a quantifiable effect on an individual's performance and ability to perform. Mental well-being is another one, right? We need students to grow and thrive in their built environment. This is the second environment that they spend the most time with. First, it's home, then it's schools. In some students' cases, the school is their safest, healthiest. It's their place to thrive. They may not have that at home. So, what does mental wellness and mental well-being look like in a school? We know from the science that decluttering classrooms de-stresses the brain. We know views in nature de-stresses the brain and provides joy. We know that outdoor play areas provide those same joys and outdoor learning experiences that have this intrinsic value to children. Health is another big category. Indoor air quality, clean water, attributes that we know have a quantifiable effect on asthma, on attendance, on teacher retention, etc. So the other categories I put in there, safety and security is a big one. And a
Yep.
high performance school hides its hardening elements, its safety hardening elements in a soft environment, right? I've talked to police chiefs, counselors, designers, researchers. They all say that we need, cathedrals of learning, inspiring environments in which the hardened aspects are hidden behind the scenes, that aren't up in front and center for the students. And the last one, I know this is a long-winded answer. It's hard because there's so many attributes to a high-performance school. The last one I think that's really important is the climate resilience, to plan for the longevity of that school building, not just for the environment today, but for the environment of 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. And how do we make buildings adaptable to perform in that climate moving forward?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you there,
There's
Craig.
one that I didn't mention, and this is a fairly controversial. I know even some of my board members will tell me I might say this. I didn't include energy efficiency in that. And the reason is when we work backwards from the occupants, teachers and students being the primary occupants of that school building, energy efficiency isn't like, it's not something that they see on a daily basis. It's something the school district sees on their bills. Certainly, we need to use money wisely. So we need to make things as energy as efficient as possible to meet those other design initiatives. However, something that has been a challenge in the industry is when you have these different priorities like energy efficiency, you can make bad design decisions that dilute these other attributes from students. Windowless schools, as an example,
Yes.
right? That is a classic example that we have even built in the last 20 years where extremely energy efficient. They meet the design criteria, but everything else, productivity, mental well-being, health, just absolutely tank when you do that.
It's like we didn't learn anything from the 1970s. We've been through this, and it wasn't that long ago. We've been through this, and we
Absolutely.
built some really horrible buildings. Well, I'm in my late 50s, so the schools that I went to were, they looked like Soviet Union era brutalists, just absolutely no connection to the natural world, and they sucked, and everybody knew it. And here we are again in that same place. I'm sorry I'm ranting, Craig, but I
No,
appreciate that comment very much.
yeah, Joe, that's an interesting part of working in the high performance school space is we've all had our own experiences. And on average, nationally, we were all in old schools with classic, you know, individual desks facing the forward, decluttered, kind of blinds pulled in the classroom. We've all been there. And then when you're in this space, you see these award winning designs, these beautiful new schools that are being built in very fortunate communities, and they're just stunning. And you just can't help but think, like, man, what would my experience learning be like or have been like if I went to school there, you know? And yeah, it's a real reality in this field.
Oh, absolutely. I'm really glad you made that comment. Let's keep rolling though. I want to
Yeah.
talk about the three performance programs from CHIPS.
Yeah.
Like a CHIP, I believe the three are the CHIPS design schools, CHIPS
Hmm.
verified schools, and
Yep.
then the CHIPS minor renovation program. Did I get those right?
That's absolutely right.
Okay, can
That's
you
right.
tell me a little bit about each of those just so people
Yeah,
understand what the key components are?
absolutely. Well, I mentioned LEAD earlier, and I think let's start with CHIPS Verified. The CHIPS Verified program is really almost identical to LEAD, right? Very similar process in which design teams send us the documentation. They have to meet our criteria, and we review their documentation to make sure that occurs. I have a team led by my technical director is wonderful, Alex Buchanan, and reviewers, including Michaela and Twishy, who look through all those documents to make sure that what the design team says they're doing meets our high performance criteria. That's the verified program, the closest to LEED.
Okay.
The design program is the light version, right? We know that time and money are real challenges for all school districts, most school districts. And so the intention of the design was to create a program that was a much easier, lighter touch. So in the design program, we don't require documentation of the school. We just require a narrative, little essays from the design team on how they met our criteria. So it's not exactly that we're checking the homework, we're kind of checking the interview answers of the design team.
Right.
And then
Right.
lastly, the newest program is the Minor Renovations program, and that's being directed by Jen Collins on our team. That program is designed to put high performance standards, individual standards of best practice to individual project types. We just completed our flooring minor renovation part. We're going to work on lighting and HVAC next because up to 70% of most school bond money is going for minor renovations. New construction, major renovations, that's what CHIPS and LEED and WELL and Green Globes all cover new construction and major renovations. But up to 70% of bonds is for those small projects. It's what performance contractors use. It's what utility rebates are for. It's what federal incentives are for. But there's no standard holding design teams and engineers accountable for best practices. That's what we've been creating so that school districts can easily adopt something that says, hey, we don't care what kind of flooring you use as long as it meets this performance standard.
Right. Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, it's interesting. I work in glazing and light diffusing
Mhm.
glazing to bring in daylight. And we recently, we were sort of backed into the idea of creating a retrofit, like something that doesn't require you to take out your existing windows, but something that you can overlay simply and inexpensively on top of
Yeah.
your existing windows to diffuse the light to get rid of glare. And it's not even public yet. Like we haven't even announced that the product is
Oh, wow.
available, and everybody I talk to is like they're literally as the kids say, they're blowing up my phone to talk about this retrofit thing, and that's why all the money's in retrofit these days. So
There is, and it's not just the retrofit itself, right? Part of the best practices is how do you train the teachers to make sure that the blinds stay open? How do you train
right.
the teachers on dynamic lighting or the light switches, which are newer and more functional than what they're used to? So these performance standards can't just be the specific products or that. It has to include training, operations, maintenance, and education of the staff.
Yeah, for sure. That's very cool. All right, I want to
Yeah.
talk about membership. Right, you have
Yeah.
membership. Tell me what the benefits are of being a CHIPS member.
Yeah, that's a great question. Historically, and what we currently have for members is the opportunity to participate in CHIPS, right? We have a national technical committee that help answer questions that our team sometimes can't answer. It's too complicated, it's too technical, it's a toss up on what we think the answer is. So we send technical school questions to our national technical committee, which is made up of members. And the value there is that folks get, they get resume material. They get to look at top schools around the country and what, technical questions they have on, the acoustics of this HVAC box in the ceiling. How do walls separate, mobile walls between classrooms, how do they affect the acoustics, right? These are really technical. We get a lot of acoustic questions, really technical pieces that technical committee gets to be aware of. That's one value. The other value is, we have symposiums that we host fairly regularly, and we need quality speakers. And, I have a limited Rolodex, a limited knowledge of great speakers out there. I turn to my members first to ask them to come speak and participate. But that's really it. I think the biggest value, and this is not a value per se, it's more, our mission is to accelerate the modernization of our schools. We want the highest performing schools. And that as a nonprofit mission requires financial support. And so we look for companies primarily that have that same value and are willing to support us. And that we're incredibly grateful for.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I like that. Let's talk about codes and lobbying. Do you guys get into that world at all? Do you
No,
try to influence codes at all, or is that part of your
no,
mandate?
we haven't. I think the Chips has always tried to be one or two steps ahead of code,
Okay.
which, as you can imagine, given how much codes change and where they are at different parts nationally, that's a challenge.
Yep.
And historically, Chips has had, we have a California version, we have a US version, we have a Northeast version, we have a Hawaii, a Texas, and a Virginia versions that right now, to be honest, those are all dated. They're about 10 years old. So we know that code is caught up in many ways. We don't try to influence it. CHIPS is part of several initiatives. One is the Basic Coalition, which lobbies the federal government on all things, money and schools to get more federal incentives and more federal money into our school systems. So we are participants in groups that do the lobbying, but individually we don't.
Okay. Okay. Let me switch back to membership then. I
Yeah.
want to know what your membership looks like. Like, who are the members
Yeah.
of CHIPS?
Yeah. A majority of them are architectural firms that work with
Okay.
school districts. Yeah. A lot of them have done chip schools. We do offer a small fee reduction for members. It's just a little incentive to get folks aware. But a lot of architecture firms that have done chips projects become members because, we kind of go through an overview of them and how the process works. We kind of walk their hands through their first project as members, and they find that really valuable. The other group is vendors. We
Yep.
have a utility on the membership, but a lot of, door manufacturers, window manufacturers, flooring manufacturers, all who have an interest in high performance schools, also members.
Brilliant. Okay. I want to circle back on something and tie it into this conversation that we're in now. How are you guys staying on top of the changes in codes, the changes in knowledge from building science? How do you stay on top of that?
Yeah, Joe, that's a great question. And it has a multi-pronged answer. It is a challenge. I think for any nonprofit, for any executive director of running a nonprofit, right? My job is to maintain and help trips thrive. My job is not to be the code expert across the country. It is a challenge. A big part of it is listening to podcasts like yours to get up-to-date information from a variety of built environment and school specific podcasts. Conferences is a big one. Before we started recording here, we were talking about A4Lee's Learningscape podcast that just happened last week. A lot of the sessions talk about different codes or different design requirements. There's a conference called Cash in California that really goes into detail about some of the code requirements. And, it's just a lot of continuing education. You have to have a lot of professional development drive in this space to stay not ahead of the curve, but just stay afloat with all the changes.
Right. Right. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and that's why I always ask. It's one of the things that people talk about when I'm chatting with them often is the challenge of the sheer
Yeah.
volume of change lately and sometimes conflicting change too. That
Yeah.
is and that's a real challenge. And I like to talk about that a lot.
Let me just add one more thing there, Joe. One of the
Absolutely.
other one of the other complicated parts here is there's municipal building codes, there's state climate goals, there's federal initiatives, and it seems that a school district makes sense to have to follow those, but the school districts are often separate from the municipality. So what codes apply to them, what stretch codes, what incentives, it changes by location. And so it's really a challenging sector from a national perspective because, they say if you've seen one school district, you've seen one school district. And so that also is a challenge for district leaders around the country too, right? They all, we have 14,000 districts. Everyone has a leader and sometimes not even a facility manager that has to know what their local codes are. And that's a challenge and a burden on them. It's a challenge and a burden on us, service providers and nonprofits who are trying to help them.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's even more bizarre in Canada, I'll tell you. Well, maybe. Well, I mean, just in that, like in Nova Scotia, where I live, we recently eliminated school boards and school districts altogether, and everything is run provincially. It's run centrally from Halifax, which is turning into just the most bizarre thing because,
Hmm.
we don't really have any local input anymore. And everybody went for the efficiency, but we completely eliminated local voices, which is turning into a major challenge. Anyway, that's a whole other show for another time. I want to talk about adoption. I want to know how well you guys are doing as far as
Yeah.
getting people to use your systems and participate in your organization. Where are you with regards to adoption across the country?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I'll preface this that of all the big certification programs, and again, we'll talk about what the future of CHIPS looks like at the end here, but of all the big certification programs, there's no doubt that CHIPS is the smallest. We have a loyal and passionate following, but a small following. We have, over the last 20 years, have verified over 800 projects nationally. The majority of those are in California, although we are not California specific. And a big part of that is because LA Unified, the second largest school district in the country, requires CHIPS for all their
Okay.
new construction major renovations. We had Fairfax County in Virginia, which was a top 20 school district. They required CHIPS projects. There's and going back to the codes, Virginia just passed a state law that says any new construction over 50,000 feet has to meet Green Globes or LEED. And so CHIPS was not part of that. We're trying to get us included in that because new laws really should say Green Globes, LEED, or equivalent programs because they're constantly changing,
Right.
right? But nationally, we have a lot of projects in Colorado. Colorado State, the state incentivizes high performance schools that meet Green Globes, LEED, or CHIPS. They provide some from state based incentives and financial support for those projects. In Texas, Cypress Fairbanks outside of Houston was a top 25 school district in the country. They were requiring CHIPS schools. Ann Arbor just passed an adoption of resolution a year or two ago that required their projects to be CHIPS. So it's all over the country. It's fairly small still, but we do have some adoption. I think that from a nonprofit perspective, when we look at the impact, the biggest impact we have is at the state level. Rhode Island required all CHIPS projects. They didn't verify with us, they did it internally, but they took our standard and said, yeah, all projects have to meet this. The other one is Washington State, which has the Washington Sustainable Schools Protocol, which they based off of CHIPS. So they used our criteria and kind of reformulated it for their state to use. So those, from an impact perspective, that's really powerful, right? We're taking industry collectively adopted best practices, and we rely on the industry to help create our criteria. Our job is to facilitate, not to create. So we facilitate experts in the field to come up with our criteria, and then for states to adopt it is really powerful.
So, how do you bring awareness to the states that haven't adopted or districts that haven't adopted? What are you doing now, and what more do you think you could be doing in order to broaden that adoption?
Yeah, that's another great question. And that's less on the building science. Maybe for your audience, this is, a peek under the hood for a nonprofit. Nonprofits, particularly nonprofits that have been around a long time, they really do need a strong marketing arm, not just to get the programs used, but also to let donors and potential philanthropic investors or funders to let them know the impact that we're having. And unfortunately, historically, CHIPS has not had a big marketing push. So we haven't told a lot of those stories that we should have, right? We've been meaning to and wanting to, with LA, have a conference in LA to celebrate all of their CHIPS schools. That's something that LA has desired. It's something that would be great for CHIPS. We just haven't historically been able to do that and had the marketing investment to do that. So a lot of it is storytelling at the policy level, at the state level. A lot of it is just awareness for school district leaders that, hey, you know, half an hour talking about what this program is can actually save you and your team a lot of money down the road, a lot of time and a lot of money, right? It's really just educating individually. And that you mentioned top down, from the Nova Scotia and the Canadian model, it's bottom up from school districts. So it's hard to market to both communities, school boards, school district leaders, architects all at the same time, but that is what's needed.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask a question essentially on behalf of manufacturers,
Hmm.
other manufacturers like ourselves. So, how can companies like Advanced Glazings, companies that make products that are designed for high performance schools, how can they assist with this effort to promote greater adoption of high performance principles and of chips specifically?
Oh, what a great question. If in an ideal world, I think anybody who's working on schools, from a facility manager to a landscaper, custodial staff and vendors, everyone, anyone, nonprofits, we'd all go through, a kind of a school 101 course where we all learn the holistic nature of schools. And I say that because, I mentioned safety and security, mental well-being, all of these important attributes from the occupants of schools. How do we collectively know and understand what the design principles are, what the products that go into these are, and how do you have an influence? So that's a long-winded way of simply saying, when you have an intervention with the school, when you're going to sell them something, that may be the only time that school is really learning about facilities. So you should not just be selling glazing, you should be selling daylighting and views for the success of students. A flooring company shouldn't just be selling flooring, they should be selling how flooring can help with indoor air quality and recycled content, right? That to me is what we all need to do, is when you have the opportunity to influence a school, that you do it from a holistic nature. Again, one of my biggest soapboxes right now is decluttering classrooms. So I would love for you and your company, when you go through a classroom and you're looking at the windows and you see it cluttered, have a conversation with the principal of that school about the science that shows how much that is stressing out the student's brain, and how a simple intervention, new windows, decluttered classrooms, kind of a refresh.
Love it. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely love it. Okay, we have to circle back to what we talked about at the very beginning. Alignment between chips and other green certifications,
Yeah.
LEED, Green Globes, Passive House, all of those. How does it work with them? I think it's an alternative, but is there any sort of coordination in any way, Craig?
Yeah, that's another great question. Historically, all the certification programs have been in competition,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Well, LEED, Green Globes, CHIPS, International Living Future Institute at the Living Building Challenge, LBC, Passive House. I mean, the list keeps growing. It is unfortunate that that's the case with schools because, again, from a school district perspective, and the biggest summary to your audience, school districts have limited resources. That means limited money, limited time, and limited knowledge. Their job is to make students thrive. Their job is not to know the ins and outs of a school building. Some have facility managers that are designed to do that, but again, sometimes they're struggling with just getting bus drivers, not understanding the newest and greatest lighting technology or glazing, the new product that you have coming out. So it is kind of on us all to educate them, not in competition, but in collaboration.
Love it.
So I'll give you an example. What I've been trying to do over the last few years is to start working more with these. And right now I've been working with the Center for Green Schools at the USGBC. They historically have been our biggest competitor. I've been working with them to make us a biggest collaborator. I've been working with their director, Anissa, to really start working on projects together and start exploring the discussion of how could LEED and CHIPS work together and be incorporated together. So we've started that because I fully believe we need to work together and be more collaborative for school districts, not competitive.
Right on. Yeah, I agree entirely. I think I'm glad to hear you say that. All right, Craig, we're at the point in the show where I ask my $1 million question. There's a question I ask every single episode, as you
Okay.
know.
No
So,
pressure.
so it's your turn. And zero pressure, absolutely no pressure. Answer the question from whatever perspective that you'd like.
Yeah.
What makes a great building?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? I was reflecting on this, because I know you've asked it to other guests in your show. I think it's one of those things where a great building, you know it when you feel it. And I think a part of that is a great building exceeds its already great design intentions. So that could be a library that's designed to be inspiring. That could be a football stadium which is designed so everybody gets, great views and can hear really well. That could be a religious institution that absolutely just opens your mind and has you stare up in awe, right? Whatever the design intention of that building, if it's exceeded, then that can be a great building. And you know it when you feel it.
Oh, excellent. Beautiful answer. All right. Before we go, I always ask people if they want to do any sort of promotion, any exciting
Yeah.
news. You can tell us some exciting news. And also, on top of that, you wanted to talk a little bit about where Chips is going. Let's use this opportunity to talk about that.
Yeah. Well, first, before I talk about those up and coming opportunities, I do want to thank my whole team, and I mentioned a lot of them, including Bill, to help Chips, be where it's at today. And I want to thank all the members and supporters, my board members, who have all helped carry Chips's legacy for the last 20 years. We agreed that we needed to evolve as an organization, again, because there's so much competition out there, and because we don't want to be adding to that competition. So one of the biggest announcements I already mentioned was the Minor Renovations program. We are about to kick off the lighting program, the lighting working group, where we are going to look at Chips's and LEED's criteria to see what package of those criteria are best applied for a lighting project. We need industry experts for that. We need vendors, we need lighting designers, we need architects, health experts all involved so that we can collectively create that program that's industry, that's built up from a variety of stakeholders in the industry. We just had this great success with the flooring program where we had 4 different flooring manufacturers, a couple architects, and school districts all part of the same working group. So to me, if you're involved in lighting, anything from the glazing side, daylighting tubes, lighting, fixtures, shading devices, any of that, we'd love for your participation. As a nonprofit, we do have a kind of pay to participate. I know that that's always challenging for a lot of supporters, but the reason is because we need you to take that seriously, and we need our time and staff to make this run really smoothly. But that's the number one program we have going now. We're going to do lighting next, and then we're going to do HVAC, which is going to be a real hard one to do.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. My best of luck to you and your team.
Yeah.
I'm sure you'll pull it off, and I mean that not in a sarcastic way. I sincerely wish you the best of luck, but we both know that
Yeah.
one's going to be interesting for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
Craig, is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Well, I think that where we're going, the other part that I've been working on, and we've called this the Raise the Floor initiative, is figuring out how we can get real sustainable nonprofit support for school districts. Right now, the industry of support is really fragmented. We got a ton of really passionate people running a lot of small organizations, all helping with schools. And unfortunately, unlike other sectors, the school building sector has not had substantial philanthropic support. We're all pretty small. We get small $50,000 to $100,000 grants. Other sectors have multi-million-dollar organizations and institutes to try to make real change in that industry. I'll give you an example. Enterprise Community Partners is a big nonprofit that works in affordable housing. They're a $150 million a year organization. They try to have all the solutions under one roof. A really commendable and inspiring organization. How do we get that for schools? How do we get philanthropy to step up to recognize the problem? How do we, as the nonprofits, all align around a common vision and have our programs work additively together? How do we, and most importantly, how do we let the school decision makers know that there's one place to go for all your facilities questions? And that not to reinvent the wheel, but just to bring all the best wheels together so that that's a really simple place to go. That's what we're working on now with the Raise the Floor. And if your audience, if you, Joe, have any ideas on how to do that and what is needed, we are in the early design phase of that, very ambitious work.
Well, I might be interested in helping with that for sure. Craig, thank you
Appreciate it.
so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure. Let's make sure we stay in touch, okay?
Yeah, likewise, Joe.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Better Buildings for Humans. For more information on the world's best light diffusing and highly insulating glass glazing, please visit advancedglazings.com.